Life. Our next guest is an author and speaker, and he speaks more than 500 times a year to over 250,000 people. His latest book is titled Life. Would you welcome to TBN, David Edwards.
Hello, Thank you, Pastor. It is good to be here.
You speak at all of these places, and God has given you the ability to author books. And what is going on?
I have to say, well, there's no way you can be in this place tonight and not know that the presence of Jesus is real. And one of the things I appreciate about TBN is that they've enabled the glory of God to pour right through that camera, right into somebody's home who's sitting there by themselves, and to sense and to experience the ministry of Jesus. And I just have to say, it seems like every time you turn on the news, it's always bad news and it's always something wrong. But as I travel around the country, the presence of God has become so evident. In the last 9 weeks, I've spoken to about 30,000 people across the country, and I was at one spot. We had 6,000 students in one spot. We had 1,400 decisions in that one night.
Wow.
It was just the presence of God that swept across that place.
Praise God.
It was just students begin to stand up out of the crowd and say, I want to follow Jesus. I want to go after God. And so I'm seeing that all across the country at every different age level. So in the course of a year, I'll speak to everyone from middle schoolers to senior adults, and every place that across this country, regardless of whether it's in the country or in the city or wherever it is, God is up to something great. I'm telling you, something big is going on.
Well, there must be a powerful message that you are you're echoing, you're trumpeting, you're blasting to your hearers. What is that message in you?
I'll tell you what I've dealt with probably in more than the last year than ever before is what I call one of the invisible giants of the Christian life. It's one of the invisible giants of our life and faith. And the presence of this giant is felt by almost everybody at some time or another in their life. And yet they don't know what to call it. And yet it has the ability to get into our life and to wreak havoc. It is this giant that gets in the middle of our success, in the middle of our dreams, and steals our hope and steals our encouragement. It's been the source of a lot of people going to therapy and feeling like they're about to lose their mind at every moment. And it's invisible giant because it is often felt, but no one really knows what to call it. And it is the giant of comparison.
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 Let me tell you what the invisible giant of comparison is. Comparison is anytime we try to figure out whether we're happy based on measuring ourselves against some other physical standard. Comparison is anytime we think, okay, I'm only going to know if I'm successful based on how I think I'm doing in regard to somebody else. And it is this invisible giant that gets into our experience with the Lord. It gets into our life. It gets into our faith, and it wreaks havoc. And so I've spent a lot of time helping people of all generations to know how to identify this giant, to know why it's there, and to know what to do about it. And believe it or not, there is a story in the Old Testament where, out of Numbers, not the phone book, but the book of Numbers in the Bible,
Numbers,
right?
Okay.
And it is a story about, well, as you know, God liberates Israel after many, many hundreds of years of enslavement and slavery and torture and torment. He gets them out of Egypt. He takes them up to the edge of the promised land, and he says, this is what I have for you. This is where I'm going to take you. And at that moment, they take a spy from each of the 12 tribes. They send them into the promised land, and God says, okay, I want you to go into that land and look at it and see if it's not everything that I told you it would be. And so they go into that land, and sure enough, they can't believe what they see. Their minds are absolutely blown because the produce that this land yields is so giant that it takes 2 guys to carry a bushel of grapes back to the camp. But by the time they get back to the camp, comparison breaks out. And here's where we pick it up. Listen to what happens. Let me read this to you. This is Numbers chapter 13, verse 27. And they told him and said, we went to the land where you sent us, and it certainly does flow with milk and honey, and this is its fruit. Nevertheless, the people who live in the land are strong, and their cities are fortified. Verse 31, and we were not able to go up against these people, for they were too strong for us. And we became like grasshoppers in our own sight, and so we were in their sight. And this invisible giant of comparison steps out, and these people feel such fear that they back away from what God has for them. Now, throughout the Old Testament, the word land is always symbolic of the will of God. So what's happening is God takes these people out of bondage. He takes them up to the edge of his will, and he says, this is where I'm going to take you. I have a new future for you. I'm going to do something new that's not determined by governments or economy or your limitations. I'm going to take you into someplace new. All you got to do is just trust me to get you there. And the invisible giant of comparison steps out, and all they can see are these giants. And they say, these people are so giant, and they live in fortified lands, and they have everything, and we have nothing. And so here's the point. Here's where I sense that all this, and you've kind of heard this theme all the way through tonight, you know, as people have been talking about helping pastors to really rise up and do the will of God for their life, and individuals. So I think the first thing, in order to dismantle and disarm the invisible giant of comparison, you have to be alert to the symptoms. Right? Anytime comparison is at work in someone's life, there's always two major symptoms. We always, A, distort other people's success. We look at somebody else and we think they're happier, they're richer, they're more successful, they're cooler, they've got it going on, they got all the breaks. And we always look at somebody, and the nature of comparison is to feed our mind with a lot of ideas, and then we project it onto somebody else and just decide that everybody else is better. This is why when people compare, nobody ever compares down. Nobody ever says, I am way too wealthy.
No.
Right? No one ever says, well, I can have more poverty in my life. Nobody ever says, I am way too sick. Yeah. Right? I mean, no one ever says, I'm way too good at health. Why can't I be sicker? Right? Yes. We always compare up. Right? So when one of the symptoms is that we always distort other people's success, and then B, we discount ourselves. And you see this going on right here.
That's right.
In verse 33. And we became like grasshoppers in our own sight, and so we were in their sight. They're so big, we're so small.
Right.
They have everything, we have nothing.
Right. And
this is a big deal, you know, I think in our journey of getting to the next place where God wants us to be, regardless of what kind of news we hear every day. It's because comparison can hit people in a lot of different areas. I mean, there's a reason why in our country the libraries are empty and the gyms are packed. The people, for some people, it's their body image, and people have gone to work on their body. Right. And you know, this is a different deal. I mean, men and women deal with physicality in different ways. Right. Women, no matter how beautiful they look, are never happy with how they look. Right. They're always unhappy. Men, on the other hand, no matter how hideous a guy looks, right? All men brag about their bodies. They're like, look how fat I am. That's a lot of Krispy Kremes, right? You know, they just, right? It's just different to be a guy sometimes, you know? But it hits people, I mean, you think about where it hits people. It hits people in terms of their body image. It hits people in terms of their profession and their finances. Comparison is at work and in the church as well. I see it a lot.
That's right.
I've seen a lot of people roll into church who are faithful Bible believers and love God, and they look at someone who's a brand new believer and they think, man, God got a hold of that guy. Man, me, I've always just kind of grown up in church. I've seen people that are brand new believers look at someone who's a seasoned believer, and man, this guy thinks to himself, man, they quote all the verses from the Bible without having to look at the Bible, and they sing the songs from memory, and they got their hands up, and this guy thinks, man, I don't think I can ever be that spiritual. And that's comparison, because the enemy wants us to believe that if we all don't have the same experience with God, that somehow our experience isn't valid.
That's good.
And that's just not true. And the unique thing about God is that what God's doing in one part of the world right now, He's doing something different in another part of the world. People, we all come to God under different terms and different ways. I got to tell you, I've wanted to do the last 15 years on the road. And I wanted to, I started to call to preach when I was 16. And it took me forever to finally get started. And I almost turned the call down because of comparison. Because of every speaker that ever came to my church always had the craziest stories. They would get up, have these crazy life stories, and they would say, you know, I smoked tree bark, and I freebased Jell-O, and I robbed a bank, and I burned the house down. Then when I went into the 4th grade, you know, you're like, what? You know, and I'm out there, and, you know, I grew up, I'm a church guy. The rowdiest I ever got is I once smoked a Crayola. Yeah. You know, so I don't, you know, I don't come from a crazy past. It's just kind of, you know. And I thought if my life story wasn't as crazy as somebody else's, that God couldn't use me. And that's just not true. Because God calls us all, wherever we are, with what we have, what we had available.
That's right.